Okay, so I've been fortunate enough that John Miller from Hive has come down to Toronto. He saw the video that I posted with my test results from the 100C, and he graciously emailed back almost right away with a whole list of stuff that was over my head, and then I figured it out, and it started to make sense. I digested, and then I forgot about it all, and now he's here in Toronto, and he's explained to me a lot more about the light so I can understand why it puts the colors out that it does, and how to make it work best for us as cinematographers so it matches other fixtures. And the first thing that we can talk about probably is this meter, the Sekonic meter that I use as my benchmark. Is not necessarily the most accurate of meters, but it's accurate for one reason, which is
yes. So it's really so. I think one of the issues that sometimes you'll see between like a handheld meter like a Sekonic and some of the light that's created by sort of what's done in the labs of manufacturers is that light laboratories have a very high-end set of meters that are really designed to measure in absolutely perfect conditions. And so with perfect conditions, you can be very, very, very sensitive. And so we test all of our lights in these perfect conditions. However, on film sets, you are rarely presented with perfect conditions. And so the Sekonic meter is really trying to solve for an average situation where everything's not going to be perfect. You're going to have some spill light, you're going to have some stray light, you're going to have a lot of different sources. And it's trying to tell you just sort of approximately what that specific light source that you're pointing at is giving you. And that's a really powerful tool for on set, but it can result in some slightly different measurements for, say, a manufacturer than what you might find if you're doing tests like is done here.
Yeah, so like the scientific perfect meter that's used in a laboratory, which we're kind of just calling like the lab meter, is making this light show everything absolutely perfect. But for me as a cinematographer, the lab metering isn't always matching the camera sensors and the things that we're used to using. So by using the Sekonic, it kind of matches more of what my camera is going to be giving me as a reading. And that's where I got these numbers that matched more for my practical use, not a lab situation. So depends what you think is perfect, whether the lab is perfect or whether this, the camera sensors are perfect. So I found these values, and John showed me another way to get almost identical values with a different method. I don't know if it's worth showing that or.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about it. I mean, I think what I was trying to explain or just sort of bring up when I first looked at the video, what I realized that maybe wasn't necessarily obvious is that because you're going to have different meters, you're going to have different cameras, there's going to be the opportunity to try and tune the light to those different sensors. And there's a couple different ways you can approach it. I know that it was approached, Justin did it really practically, which he said, all right, let me try and change the white light. Let me first try and get the reds I want, and then let me change the white light, the color temperature, until my meter reads the 5600 or the 3200 I was hoping for. And so what I just kind of wanted to demonstrate to him was you're able to keep the base white light, the 5600 or the 3200, and use your hue and saturation controls to get very similar results. Now, neither approach is wrong. Neither approach is particularly necessarily right, which sometimes can be frustrating. And that kind of comes back to our conversation about practically useful and lab perfect, which are, can sometimes be in conflict. But I think what's useful about this is just to give everyone another approach to do this while being able to keep sort of a 5600 and a 3200 set. So what we did was we just tried to replicate, how can I get the highest CRI, the most, full spectrum, best readings on like our R9s while adjusting the light. And so what we found is that if you can add a certain amount of saturation, and we can show those different settings, but if you add a little bit of the saturation at a slightly different hue, you're able to get a similar result. Because pretty much what was going on is when you add that red that was being added at 0 hue, and then also bringing the color temperature to a higher color temperature, you're adding both red and blue. And another way to do that is to actually add sort of either purple or magenta to the light through the hue and saturation controls. And that's kind of what we went through.
Yeah. So yeah, different ways to approach it. And so moving forward, people have asked a lot about whether there's going to be firmware updates, how the light's going to change, if things are going to be changing with the light. which is something maybe you can address then too.
Yeah. So one of the things that we really wanted to do when we released the light, and obviously this first stemmed from a Kickstarter project, and we really wanted to make sure that any innovations that we were able to create over time would still be available to people who had already purchased the light and be available to people as they purchase the light. So we're looking at right now different ways that we can provide firmware upgrades. One might be to sort of create a less of a lab light mode, but more of a in the field mode that might make some of these corrections unnecessary for certain cameras. As well as maybe a couple different settings, ones that might be more solved for the human eye and less for a camera, and other different possibilities. So right now we're really looking at having a couple different firmware options that will be available. They'll be available to people who already own the lights. They'll be available to people who buy the lights now and buy the lights in the future. Where some of the things that we're doing here, which Justin has kindly solved for you already, can come prepackaged in the light when you get it.
Well, that's an update, and thanks, John, for coming down to Toronto.
Yeah, absolutely.
Check us all out.
I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Thanks.
See?
Cool.
All right.